So our learning targets, what is the potential impact of questioning on student learning? What are the different purposes of questioning? And what are some powerful questions I can start asking my students tomorrow? So hopefully by the end, we'll have those 3 things accomplished. We'll know if we accomplish them because we'll be able to identify how questioning impacts student learning, be able to name at least 3 purposes for asking questions to students, and have questions that I can ask in my class tomorrow. We're going to start with a video. And as you watch this video, I want you to think about the impact of questioning on this classroom.
In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the, anyone? The Great Depression, passed the, anyone? A tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which, anyone, raised or lowered? Raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government. Did it work? Anyone? Anyone know the effects? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression. Today, we have a similar debate over this. Anyone know what this is, class? Anyone? Anyone? Anyone seen this before? The Laffer curve. Anyone know what this says? It says that at this point on the revenue curve, you will get exactly the same amount of revenue as at this point. This is very controversial. Does anyone know what Vice President Bush called this in 1980? Anyone? Something DOO economics. Voodoo economics.
So we're going to capture our thoughts in a new protocol. So this is the new tool for us to capture our thoughts. So on a piece of paper, I want you to kind of make this template. And we're going to jot down what was our magnetic reaction to that video. Again, thinking about the questioning. So what attracted us, what attracts us about the questioning in that video, and what repels us about the questioning in that video. And I'll give you about 30 seconds to a minute to just kind of jot down your thoughts. Again, what's attracting about the questioning and what's repelling about the questioning. Did anything attract us about the questioning in that video?
There was no attraction for me in that video. What I was drawn to is humor. And so when you ask the questions, is there anything you're attracted to with the questioning? It's like, no, nothing attracted me to that. It really repelled me.
One thing that might be attracting to some people is that the teacher had full control. There was really no opportunity for the class to get, off task or off tangent or anything. So that might attract some people.
I found nothing attractive in that video.
Then I guess I'll open it up. What repelled us about the questioning in that video?
I don't think he allowed time for the kids to process the question, even though they were just open, closed questions.
His think time needs some help.
Right.
He answered his own questions.
So why is that repelling?
He just doesn't care that the students aren't engaged. Shows no interest in what they're thinking at all.
Anything else?
I'm going to build on what Kathy said. He was very answer driven, like he knew an exact answer what he wanted. And so it's like, I'm going to ask this question to give me the exact answer I want. And so there is no openness to it. Let me just get this answer, and if I give it to you, then hopefully it sinks in.
He just seemed to say anyone all the time, and that was driving me crazy.
So now let's think about this. What impact does the questioning in the video have on student learning? So we talked about what attracts us and repels us from his questioning, right? And we touched on this a little bit. What impact does that questioning have on student learning? Does anybody have anything to build on with that question?
I don't know. It just seemed like he wasn't getting any responses from the students. So, you didn't know if the students understood what they were learning or not.
He was definitely covering content.
Right.
But
were they actually learning it?
They didn't. One was sleeping. He clearly was not learning. It wasn't driving the student learning.
Right. And so what we're going to think about now in terms of a magnetic reaction is this quote right here. So the idea that teachers should facilitate discussion and use effective questioning techniques to guide student learning. And so I want you to just jot down some ideas. We'll take a minute or so about what attracts you towards that quote and what's repelling about that quote. So what's attracting you to this quote right now? Does anybody want to start us out with what's attractive about this?
Well, I think if you're asking open-ended questions and you're getting students' responses, then it's getting them to actually engage more with the content and getting them to express their current understanding rather than teachers saying, this is how it is. From that perspective, you can then move on and try and explore areas maybe where the students need some reinforcement or some new concepts.
Would anyone like to build on Colin's thought or start a new thought?
Just getting that discussion and where you're facilitating discussion and not just teaching and giving, but allowing the kids to start, getting into more discussion with the learning.
And how important is that discussion to kids actually learning and internalizing these things?
I think it's very important.
Anyone else?
So I wrote down something that attracted me to that quote was this idea of effective questioning, because it's not just questioning that facilitates discussion, right? It's not just any sort, like we saw in the video, he had questioning, but it did nothing to facilitate discussion. So getting at this idea of what makes effective questioning, what makes the questions that we ask effective in order to get the discussion that we want. So that's something that attracted me in that quote.
Anyone else?
To build on what Karen just said, I think one area that can be indicative of effective questioning is obviously that it shouldn't just be closed output answers, right or wrong, but it's actually any question that encourages a student to share their current understanding of a problem or position or concept, whatever it is that you're trying to work with.
I really like the way you phrased it. Allow students to share their current understanding, because when I think of effective questioning, I think of it as a formative assessment technique. And it really has to get at where are the students right now, because we're not always going to get the answers that we want, right, based on if they're not where we think they are. And so effective questioning really gives us that window into right now, currently, where are they? So I like the way you phrase that.
Nice. Anyone else? Okay, so let's talk about some of the things that might repel us or repel teachers to that quote. Just real quick so we can look back on it. What might be repelling in that statement?
One issue that immediately occurs to me is, it doesn't exactly say it in that statement, but if you're having a whole group discussion, that can be somewhat restrictive, both in terms of the fact that you're only getting one idea discussed at a time, and also in some circumstances, whole groups suppress the willingness of students to share ideas. I think small group discussion can be good, can be advantageous as long as a teacher can go around and tune in on them.
I like thinking about the different lenses of our questioning and our discussion, and thinking at it, how does our questioning impact when we're in whole group, and how does it impact small group? That's something I hadn't considered. Anyone else?
The word guide, if it's taken out of context of this quote, you can think of the video and the teacher guiding the students learning to get that answer. And so sometimes I think this guide has some different connotations to it that we just have to be kind of cautious of. Like, what are we trying, what's the purpose of questioning, and what does it mean to guide student learning? It was my first thought. My second thought was, it's teacher to facilitate the student learning, so the students start asking each other the questions also. So it's not that one-to-one like Colin was kind of talking about, but it's really that facilitating getting the kids comfortable asking each other some questions to guide their own learning and asking themselves questions to guide their learning. So those are just the two thoughts I had.
One thought I had is how difficult it is to get started. Yeah, that sounds wonderful. I want that in my classroom tomorrow, right? But just this idea of I might want it and I realize I need it in my classroom, but that's a lot to digest, and that's a lot to think about, and that's a lot to learn how to put into practice. So something that repelled me from that quote was, while that's wonderful and beautiful to say, I don't know where to start, and that's hard.
And after that, using the appropriate types of questions, or I think going back to Patricia where she said, what does it mean to guide student learning? What kind of questions should you be asking, so they're just not where you get that definite answer. It's hard to come up with those questions and when to use them. And
I think, to build on kind of what Diana's saying, it's that how long do we let them struggle and how long do we sort of try to ask those, just knowing where that fine lane is in terms of guiding and what is that right amount of productive struggle. We know that they need to figure this out on their own and struggle, but we don't want them to shut down. So how does our questioning facilitate that? Okay. Anyone else? So why is questioning so hard? We hit at some of those things with the repelling part about it, but we talk about questioning a lot. If you Google questioning, it's one of the most, there's so many articles and resources. But what makes it so hard? Why is questioning so challenging for teachers?
for me today, that happened to me today. I tried to use some different types of questioning and the kids got really frustrated with me, and I think I got frustrated with them. And so I think it's just trying to figure out or planning ahead of time what type of questions you should be asking. So like today I experienced it and it was really frustrating, I think, for me and the students.
So when you say I tried different types of questions, can you expand a little bit more on that?
Yeah, so, I'm used to like, okay, what do we do here at this next step? So it's very directed, easy questions. Oh, we, add 5 to both sides, whatever. Today I wanted to do more of like the kids kind of investigate an approach and kind of see those relationships themselves, and whether they know what they are or not, but they were able to see them. And I think the way I was questioning was, I don't think I was getting what I wanted across to them correctly. So I think that's where there was some frustration on my part, because I kept trying to think of how, and what I should have done was plan ahead what were the types of questions I should have been asking. But I think I kind of did it at, like, this is what I'm thinking, and it just didn't come out the way it should have come out.
I've had that exact experience.
Been there, done that. Yeah.
I'd like to build on what I heard her say is not only is it hard to plan for those questions, but kids need to learn how to engage in those questions. It's not automatically, if you ask a good questions, the kids exactly have the experiences or maybe the mindsets to engage in those.
And I think it comes back to that perfect, like, it's often kind of what Kathy said. It's not like kids are like, yes, you asked me a hard question and I have to think, thank you. That's often, we have to build up to that, right? So that they start to think differently about things. Anyone else? Why is questioning so hard?
Just spitballing here, but one idea might be maybe we're still locked into expecting to get a right answer, and we're not flexible enough to be prepared to let students wander off into the weeds now and again, because that's where they can learn and explore and come back out of the weed and join us. And so I wonder whether we get too directive. So that's one thing. The other thing that I find I'm really critical about my own questioning is that I ask a lot of questions when I'm doing one-on-one tutoring, and a student will say something wrong, and then I'll start to try and explore what is the fundamental concept that they are misunderstanding, and then it turns into an interrogation and I've lost it, you know. So I get too much marching down the path to try and find what is it that they really don't understand before I can try and deal with that. So I need to find a more gentle way to encourage exploration. That's what I find hard.
Something I find hard is, you know, Diana mentioned planning for the questions. And thinking about what questions I'm going to ask. And something that I find difficult with questioning is I plan what I think are really good questions and that I think are going to get at what I want kids to learn. And then we get into it and it's this idea that Colin was talking about of I now have this lens into their current understanding, and I realize that my question doesn't meet them where they're at. And then on the fly, I'm trying to come up with the new next perfect question. And that's kind of where I find myself, where I stumble. So it's those days where I planned really good questions, but then the kids bring their current understanding, and those questions are no longer the path I need to go down. So it's the on the fly. How do I adjust my questions on the fly? That's what's hard for me.
So in thinking about that, we have an article to read, and we're going to do a magnetic attraction to each of these steps. You can also go on your own computer if you'd like to open up a browser. And right now we're just going to read step 1. So we'll take a few minutes to read that, and then we will have a discussion about it. So we're going to stop at step 3, so please do not read step 3.
Oh.
So let's just stop for a minute and talk about, step 1, and reading that and kind of reflecting on that. So let's just talk about step 1. And what are the things that attract us to step 1 in terms of questioning?
Some of the things in step 1 were some of the things we talked about, the repel earlier, especially Colin discussing how when you're having those whole group discussions, it's just a few responses you're not really getting the whole glance of all the students' discussion.
So that's just kind of affirming what we said is challenging or difficult about questioning is sort of affirmed here. Nice. Anything else about step 1?
What I really liked about step 1 is, again, it just affirms what we were talking about, that, you know, if we have these couple of awesome questions planned, we assume our discussion is going to go the direction we want it to. And I think that goes back to what I was talking about, why it's hard is because, like Colin said, when we don't hear the answer we're expecting, what path do we go down? And so what I liked about it is it just kind of affirmed some of those ideas we were talking about.
Nice. Anyone else?
Yeah, I really liked his comment of what we talked about before about fishing for the right answer. And I think that's a good way of putting it, because that is what I think I do sometimes. And when I get the right answer, then I've got a propensity to sort of stop and move on rather than just leaving it as an answer and seeing if there's any exploration about that. Somebody's got a different answer or some questions about the answer or whatever, you know. So I think his description accurate for me.
So it if I can paraphrase and kind of sum up what everybody's saying, it does a good job in this first paragraph of really talking about the struggles and why it's hard. So let's shift our focus a little bit. What can we glean from that information in terms of how we might be able to combat some of the things that make it difficult and challenging?
I believe it was Colin who commented earlier on this idea of whole group questioning versus small group questioning and the effectiveness of both of those. So I'm reflecting on times I've been in front of kids thinking that I've got this awesome whole group discussion going, and hindsight being 2020, it was a great discussion between me and one student. Whereas if I would have structured that a little bit differently, and I would have had that exact same question asked, but to small groups, I'm now wondering what the impact on student learning would have been.
Any other comments about that second paragraph? Okay, let's talk about step 2. What's attracting about step 2 and what's repelling about step 2?
I like his idea in that first paragraph of putting up a PowerPoint with the questions, because that does, to my mind, two things. First of all, it makes you think about the questions that you want to ask. And the other thing is it enables you to split the class up into small group and everybody can see what the questions are. So I like that.
I agree. I really like that idea. Again, reflecting back to times I've been in front of kids thinking I had a great whole class discussion happening and wondering if I would have tried that, ask the same questions, and then rather than just having one of the 30 students respond, be more purposeful in having the groups discuss. Therefore, I might not get to hear every single response, so that would be a con to it. But then I've got multiple students engaged in the discussion, and small group kids stay more engaged. So I'm really liking this idea of, like Colin said, putting them on a PowerPoint and engaging class discussion that way.
Any other thoughts or ideas that we want to bring out?
Putting them on a PowerPoint, definitely, so you're not designing them on a fly, but also having the flexibility as those discussions grow and kids get comfortable with having these discussions about themselves, then what questions arise out of their discussions, like being flexible to say, okay, here's the questions we're going to start with, and then as the kids start these discussions, adding to them. Because I was just thinking with that last statement, encourages teachers to help students identify opinion and utilize evidence to support their argument. Well, when you're doing that in math, it raises more questions and more conjectures, and so it's that organic discussion and how that can be, added to the PowerPoint.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that happens a lot, right? As kids explore, more questions arise. If we're doing our job in creating that hunger and that interest and that engagement.
Absolutely.
And I think that's where knowing or having a toolbox of questions, or kind of those hip pocket questions that we know are going to take us across concepts, can help us as teachers. So if we have our really awesome question that we engage students in to begin the discussion, but then we also know we have to have this toolbox of questions we can ask to keep it going and to keep the learning moving forward.
Something that just occurred to me was that, going back to sort of what Karen was just talking about, was I wonder how it will work if the teacher, having had the student give something that indicated a good understanding, then asked a question which implied an incorrect content or an incorrect understanding, so that the students would then get to be able to pick apart what the teacher said and point out the errors in the teacher's statement. That that seems to go back more to his comment of not leading the discussion, but, you know, encouraging more, if you want to call it that, democratic discussion, and at the same time encouraging students to question even what they believe to be the right answer.
That's interesting. That's something I need to think about, I think.
Everything that I was thinking was discussed, just about the questioning in the smaller groups and getting all your students to work together to work together on those questioning. So everything is kind of discussed that I had in mind.
So Karen and I chose this article because we really liked step 1 and 2. It really validated what we thought was hard about questioning, but also gave some kind of concrete practical strategies. There is a step 3, and it talks about scaffolding from easiest to hardest, but there's a time, we feel that there's a time and a place for that type of scaffolding, but not something that we really wanted to talk about or discuss. And so we made the decision not to read step 3 because it opens up sort of a different discussion that's still important and still a great discussion, but not really related to the focus of our work together today. So in thinking about that, what we'd like to talk about next is, and we've talked about it a little bit, so what are some of the different reasons that we ask questions of students? And so if we can just popcorn out kind of quickly, what are some of the purposes for asking questions?
Would it be like for some type of, you know, check for understanding, for just...
So check for understanding. What else?
To build student skills in critiquing and analyzing.
Okay.
I was working with elementary teachers, and we're doing student interviews, and so just really questions, but really thinking about what the kids are telling us and listening to help us understand that background knowledge the kids are bringing in and the strategy. So yes, it's understanding. I would build on that, but understanding where they are and they're learning right now, but also listening to understand what their prior knowledge is. So my thoughts on questioning are a little stuck with elementary interviews today.
There's an issue that we've already mentioned, and I think Karen said it, which was questioning as formative assessment.
Any others?
So last fall, right, when we as teacher leaders were in study groups, my biggest aha was that one of the purposes of asking questions is a way to communicate to students what you value, is that students learn what we as teachers value through the questions that we ask. So a purpose for asking questions is a way of communicating to students what we find important. So if we're only asking low-level yes, no, right, wrong questions, students very quickly pick up on that we as teachers value the answer, and that's it. Whereas if we ask higher level questions that really get at these other 4 ideas, students quickly pick up that we value their thinking and that we value the process of learning. So kind of a hidden purpose for me for asking questions is communicating my values to students.
I'd like to reiterate, you said it the last, but communicating that we are interested in what they actually think. And so you have to ask the questions that allow them to reveal that they think in order to show that you care what they think.
Anybody else? Any other purposes that we can think of?
I think I'm also interested in trying to find out how students think. I mean, what their process is, what the steps are that they're going through when they're trying to pick apart something that they're not familiar with. Because that's what I'm really interested in, I think.
Anybody else? Last call. So in thinking about that, those are, and I think that's the thing that makes questioning so difficult, is because we ask questions for a lot of different reasons. And we have to sometimes decide on the fly what question we need to ask to unveil a different reason based on the reason. So we found a resource that we wanted to share with everyone, and we'll also post it on the Edmodo page. But it's a really great resource. It's 100 questions that promote mathematical discourse. And the great thing about it is they're not just questions that teachers can ask students. They're also questions that students can ask of each other. And the way that they've grouped the questions is sort of based on what the purpose of the question might be. So the first ones are questions that'll help students work together to make sense of the mathematics and help students rely more on themselves to determine something. We talked about that perseverance piece earlier, and how do we build their capacity with that. So it just goes through and has just sort of a variety of different types of questions that we might be able to ask and that students might be able to ask each other based on a particular purpose. And so we will definitely share that resource in Edmodo. The last thing we have before we kind of close is we found an article that, and we'll share that as well, is just 5 questions that you can start asking tomorrow. It doesn't matter the content, what you're doing, just starting to ask these questions is a great place to start getting that discussion happening with your students and with each other.
Well, I really like what you said. It doesn't matter the content. And these are kind of, I know I referred to earlier, those like hip pocket toolbox questions that we can have ready to go regardless of the day, regardless of the concept, regardless of the group of kids. We know that these are ones that are going to get at deeper thinking. So I really like these 5. And the same thing with that resource we just showed, the 100 questions, they go across concepts. So it doesn't matter if it's an Algebra 1 class or a geometry class, a probability discussion. They're just really good toolbox hip pocket questions you can use after the big questions that you've planned. Now, once you're deep in the discussion, these are really great ones just to keep it going.
And to kind of glean more information to be able to know which of the content-driven questions that you've prepared ahead of time you want to ask to kind of uncover. Any other thoughts about this from anybody?
There was one question that I noticed as the resource, the 100 questions thing flashed through. And it's a question that I frequently ask my students, but it could be improved, I think. The question was, does this make sense? And it's a good idea if you can get an answer that's not yes or no. And so I think if we refine that question to be something along the lines of, explain to me why you think this makes sense, then that's a much more probing question for students of their understanding. Because anytime we ask a question that can be answered yes or no, we haven't done a really very good job with the question.
Unless we follow up with okay, does this make sense? Tell me why. Yeah,
yes, that's right.
Definitely agree.
Absolutely.
Anybody else?
What questions do you still have? Again, we can convey to our students that them generating questions is something very valuable. And honestly, I've got a resource, that's why I stepped away. Make One Change is a book that is to help students learn how to get really good at asking questions.
You said it was called Make One Change?
Make One Change.
So while we couldn't find the quote that I was thinking of, we did find this one, that the quality of a question is not judged by its complexity, but by the complexity of the thinking it provokes. I just want to close tonight with a real quick attract and repel, like we started off the session. Now that we've had our hour of conversation together, what's attracting about this quote, and is there anything that's repelling about this quote?
For me, the idea of how important a question is and what you can get from it and the thinking it can provide if you are asking those correct questions.
And it takes a little pressure off, I think, of asking, because I think we think sometimes I have to just craft the perfect question, and it has to be this really complex thing, but sometimes it can be just as simple as one of those 5 questions. So what do you think and why do you think that? Just something as simple as that, or what might this be like? Even though it seems like a simple question, the thought that it provokes is much more complex than the question sounds.
I think I would like this quotation rather more if it said, by the depth of the thinking it provokes, rather than complexity. Complexity to me is implies lots of little details, but really I want to drive the thinking down to fundamentals and big picture stuff rather than details. So I would prefer the word depth rather than complexity, but otherwise I agree with the sentiment.
So you're attracted to the quote overall, but you're repelled by the complexity of the thinking.
Not quite that way, Lisa.
The word complexity.
Yes, that's right. By the word complexity, yeah.
There we go. Anyone else?
Yeah, I was just going to ditto what you said. It takes some pressure off of me as a teacher to know that I don't every day have to craft the exact perfect, super thought-provoking, okay, that was the wrong term. It should be thought-provoking. But I don't have to craft the perfect question every day, right? It's about, it's the question I'm asking, what do you think and why? If that's getting at the depth of thinking that I want, that's a better quality question than one that I've spent a ton of time planning that kind of goes nowhere. So it's all about, sometimes, I mean, I'm one of those people that I probably ask my kids why, and that's it sometimes. But this kind of makes me feel good that if that's getting to the depth of thinking I want, then that's a quality question.
So in addition to take the pressure off of crafting these, spending a lot of difficult time crafting these questions, the purpose, it shifts the focus to the results of the thinking in the person at the receiving end of the question is where the focus is. I am all about that part of this quote. What repels me is the picture of the guy there.
He's thinking.
Complexly.
So, somebody has asked him a good question. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes.
I'm repelled by the stereotype of the sticking plaster around the spectacles.
I did not think of that when we picked this picture. So in reflection, let's take about 30 seconds to a minute, just kind of jot down some thoughts on these. What learning from today will you take back to your classroom, and how will it impact student learning? And if anybody would like to share out.
Even though it was frustrating for me today and it didn't go like I planned, I need to continue to use this in the questioning and think my questions more thoroughly before I go into my lesson, and not let today defeat me.
Yay!
Persevere in questioning. I like it.
I think I'm going to take away the idea of writing up the questions on the board or PowerPointing them for small group discussion. And I'm also going to take away the idea of not asking, did this make sense, but explain to me why this makes sense.
I'm going to take a closer look at those 100 questions and maybe, try to grab 2 or 3 that stick to me from a couple of the categories, kind of work them into my repertoire, and then maybe look at that list again in a month.
So on behalf of Lisa and Jeremy and Kathy and Colin, the MC² high school team, thanks for joining us for our first Zoom webinar.
Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody.